Welcome back to the Op Show, where we bring you the trials and tribulations, automations, and collaborations from the world of DevOps and the developer experience. We have the best show yet for you today, and our guest is Sadie Freeman, who's a backend engineer, a code instructor, and works in Go for Dapper Labs. Welcome, Sadie.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
I kind of pinged you over email right before this, but I'm going to throw it out there. Do you work in Slack?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And do you, so we're testing out this new little bit here, but what's your favorite Slack app that you use within your workspace?
Actually, I don't think my work uses it right now, but my old place had the Giphy app installed.
Oh yeah,
and it was great. I used to send pictures to my tech lead GIFs to my tech lead all the time of like a cat hanging off a branch, being like, "Help me!"
Yeah, that's a classic cat Giphy. Thanks for sharing. We're big fans of Slack, and so I'm always curious to get people's tips and tricks and favorite apps that they're using from the Slack marketplace. So a great starting point, I think you have a really interesting story of when you getting into development and some of the learnings along the way. So how did you get started as a developer? Take us back to the beginning and kind of walk us forward from there.
Sure, yeah. So I guess I've always been kind of techie, just on sort of computers. Like I had the Neopets HTML background.
Ooh.
I don't know if you've seen that. There's a bunch of people on Twitter right now because Neopets has released a new, they're kind of coming back. And there's a lot of people going, actually, yeah, I learned like coding from Neopets. So yeah, when I was a teenager, I used to kind of dabble in teaching myself HTML. But my dad was just really techie too. Like he was the kind of computer guy in town. And he was always fixing other people's computers. So then whenever I needed help, he was like, no, you got to Google it. Like, this is you. But I never really kind of got into it as a career until a couple of years ago. So I ended up finding a career in something completely different. I was working in learning and development for a restaurant group in the UK.
And a very interesting restaurant group, right? With a very dynamic leader, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah. So working for Jamie Oliver, celebrity chef,
wow.
Which was really fun. It was a really great place. And I actually worked there for 5 years in kind of various roles. Like I started out in recruitment and then moved into learning and development and then kind of worked my way up to sort of managing a small team there. And it was, yeah, just a totally different experience, really, really interesting. He used to come into the restaurants every now and again when we did openings and kind of come into the office. Super nice guy, exactly how he is on TV.
I love his perspective on just, thinks a lot about the environment and like farm to table. And like, he just seems like a really socially conscious food guy.
Yeah.
Kind of like a Michael Pollan. For
sure, yeah. And just very like unpretentious too. One of the things that I really liked was for the longest time, the restaurants had truffle risotto on the menu at a pretty like reasonable price. And it was just because he wanted it was a family restaurant. He wanted families of all types to be able to try this truffle risotto because normally truffle is really expensive. So that was, I really liked that. But yeah, so I worked there for 5 years and I ended up in kind of a role where we were working on really fine-tuning our training system because at the time we had all of the staff in the restaurants from waiters all the way up to head chef and general managers going through training in kind of these training booklets, which as the restaurants growed, it was just not sustainable. And I started looking into online learning systems. And that was kind of my project for a good year and a half. I was researching and eventually we kind of bought an online learning system, but I was kind of involved in the project managing of the integration of it. So getting it to hook up with our HR system and getting all of the learning materials onto that system, which I wasn't doing any of the coding, but I was kind of the go-between between the HR team and the developers. And I just remember feeling very much I like what I'm doing now, but I really want to do what these people are doing. Because I know what I need from this system. I just don't exactly know how to make it work or how to like do it.
So you want to get more into like the building, like be a little more hands-on with the solving the problem.
Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of like, I can see the problem, I know exactly what it is, and I know what would fix it. I just don't know how to like actually do that.
If you think back,
and I kind of over
Sadie,
the years,
I just gotta know, I'm sorry, but if you think back, were you into math, science, any of those sorts of like subjects that would lead you to unpack what that like voice in the back of your head was that was saying go towards the software development? What
not even a little bit.
No, okay. Music?
No.
Music's sometimes the one that I see come up quite a bit. Music?
Actually, yeah. I was like, if I think about high school, I was a classic theater nerd. Like musical theater, played the saxophone, and I was very into like English and social studies, were like the humanities were my strengths.
Okay.
I was kind of good at math. I just didn't have like a lot of drive for it. I was like, I can do this, but I don't know why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of was a bit lazy that way.
Well, if you're good at it, that might be, I was really good at math, but I failed all my math classes. So it wasn't like I enjoyed math, but I was good at it, which I think is part of what drove me, along with my music experiences in my younger years, to be more interested in programming.
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, for sure. And it's kind of, when people say like, oh, you have to be good at math to be good at programming, I don't think that's the case. I think it's logic. I think it's like problem solving and logic that is really what kind of gets you leveled up that way, for sure. But yeah, so I kind of dabbled a little bit in trying to teach myself some code, but at that point you're like, I don't know where to start. There's so much. There's all these, what language do I start with? What do I try to build something, or do I just try to learn like algorithms? And then kind of just in a perfect storm of stuff at the same time. So I was living in London in the UK. I decided I wanted to move back to Canada because I'd been there 7 years, loved it, but I was ready to come home. And I had a friend that had done Lighthouse Labs, so web development bootcamp, a year before, and she was working as a developer. And I was like, all right, well, this is, if I'm going to do it, it's going to be now. So I did that in March of 2018. I went through the Lighthouse bootcamp, which was like one of the hardest things I've done, but also like I've never had so much enjoyment out of working like 12 hours a day straight for 3 months. It was like,
so that's it. You blocked out everything else and you're like, I'm going to do that. And how did you decide what course or language or what direction you went into?
Well, I looked at the time they were only offering either the web development bootcamp or the iOS bootcamp. And I kind of looked at other companies too, but I had that like connection with someone I knew had done the course, because on the face of it, you're like, really, you're going to go and learn for 3 months and then get a job? Like, is that actually possible? But since I knew someone, I was like, okay, well, like, I mean, she's incredibly intelligent, so I wasn't surprised at all. But
social referral, that clout kind of helped you get you over the edge to know that this is actually possible.
Yeah. And it just kind of came from there. And I looked at the kind of curriculum for it, and it was talking through, making web pages, making web apps, making kind of responsive web apps, and then back-end stuff. And I was always kind of interested in the back-end side of things too. Like, I didn't want to just focus on front end. So it kind of offered a really nice mix of everything. You get like front end, back end, database, with the goal of kind of producing these like full stack junior developers. And so that's why I went through that. And it was great, and I loved it. Came out of it
2 years ago, roughly, and now you're a full-time developer.
Now I'm a full-time developer, which is kind of crazy. Like, I don't think if you told me 2 years ago when I was looking for a job, that I would be, actually getting paid to do something I really enjoy. I think I'm not sure I would have believed it. But I ended up getting my first job as a junior developer with a small startup in Vancouver, and kind of just got really lucky because the job was back end, and that's what I was really kind of drawn to. Probably because it's like that logic problem solving. I love front end, and I have endless amounts of respect for front end developers because I think it's way harder than back end. And I don't think I have the patience for it. But so I got super lucky. I got this back end junior dev job with a fantastic tech lead, Sean, who I still keep in touch with. And he really trained me up from knowing just, as much as 3 months, you learn a lot, you still know very little in the grand scheme of things. So it's really
what was
on
that
the
like?
job.
Well, I guess I think you've talked about how important mentorship was to you, but I was also thinking like, how did it feel coming out of a coding boot camp, 3 months and then getting that first job and like that first day on the job, like what was that? Was that like, was there a reality check, or was it like, oh, actually like I can do, a lot of this already. And now that I have like this network of coworkers and mentors like that actually can really help you. Or tell me about that, like that kind of that transition from school to practice.
It was terrifying mostly, in the nicest way, because I think everyone there made it much less terrifying. But it's like going right back into boot camp, basically, is all of a sudden you're like, oh, cool. Okay, now I have something completely new. Still don't really know what I'm doing. And the other thing was it was in Go. So Golang, the programming language, is not taught at Lighthouse. We learn JavaScript and Ruby. And so, getting kind of thrown into that as well and learning a whole new language was a lot. But I think mentorship, again, really important. Like Sean was great, really, really patient with me and really, kind of supportive. And I think also one of the things I think is so important for senior developers too is being so visible with when they're having a hard time solving something or when they've made a mistake or something. Like we would be sitting there and he would message me and be like, I just spent an hour looking for this thing that turned out to be a typo. Oh my God. And then I'm like, oh, okay. So that's okay. Like, instantly you're just like, okay, it's not, I'm not the worst developer in the world if I spend an hour looking for a typo. It just sometimes that happens. I think
to kind of build out that, like, it was kind of like a friend that became a mentor to you, or did you explicitly be like, hey, can you mentor me and like, support me on some of this, or it just happened naturally?
I think it was kind of natural just because of the nature of the team. So I was coming in as a junior developer, Sean was tech lead, and we were the only two on the back end. So it was a small game studio, and so there was a lot of other games developers, but we were the only two back end. So very much like the role was, he was looking for someone to mentor and to kind of train up. And so that just kind of happened really, really naturally as like kind of the nature of the role and the structure of the team. And I learned so much, like so I was there for a year and I learned just tons. But even so, it's like every month goes by and you're like doing things that are second nature now that, you had no idea what to do a couple months ago, but you still feel like you have so much ahead of you. And that's the kind of imposter syndrome too, where you never feel like you've caught up. You never feel like you're
there's the state of technology just moves so fast that it's I love this quote from Socrates, which is something like the more you know, the more you don't know, or something to that extent, that like you have this realization that you can't really master everything or know everything, so that the smarter people are true about that.
For sure, totally. It's like the cycle of learning. You have the you start with like being unconsciously incompetent at something. So like you don't know what you don't know. And then you become consciously incompetent, or you're very aware that you don't know something. And then you get to the consciously competent stage. So if you're like learning to drive, that's when you're like, okay, but I have to check my blind spot. And then finally you get to the unconsciously competent, where you're on autopilot. And it's funny because I don't think that ever happens as a developer. Like, I don't think you're ever going to get to that final stage of learning. Or if you do, I mean, the nature of it, it's a cycle. As soon as you get there, you start on the next thing that you're unconsciously incompetent at.
I've thought about this a lot. I mean, we talked a little bit before about how important confidence is in software developers, but I think that last progression, one of the things about it is there's like, you're learning different skills, right? Like Lighthouse Labs sets you up to get over that first hurdle of, I don't know what to learn. There's an infinite amount of possibilities. There's like, here's a couple, start there. Then you go into Go, and the only transferable skill is that you learned how to learn things you don't know. And then you learn Go, and you move into the second phase. This third phase is you're like, I've learned enough things that I'm comfortable in my environment. I think that fourth stage requires a level of like humility. It's almost like what you're talking about with the senior engineer who was willing to be vulnerable about the things that they didn't know. And one of the things I've always told people when they join a company is like, look, you know, you're gonna feel imposter syndrome, that's okay. But I want you to know I'll never be mad if you fail at something. I'll only be mad if you quietly try to solve it without asking anyone else. Because what you're saying there is that I'm afraid to fail, I'm afraid to learn. And I think when you get into that mentor-y position, that's kind of like that fourth cycle where I think the goal at that point is then to like realize that it's not about learning technology, it's about the humility and the interactions and the transferability of your knowledge to other people. And like you can create an environment where that's possible. And then it's less about your learning cycles, right? It's more about creating that reinforcement loop for others' learning cycles.
Definitely. Yeah. I think celebrating failure is a really, really important part in both junior and senior devs' career paths and lives, because I think with every failure you get, with every error message you read, you learn something.
Yeah. And
that brings you closer and closer to what you're trying to achieve.
What do you think were the things, like the most obvious things? Like obviously you had to learn Go, you know, that's technology. Now you have, you know, check that box. It's easy to learn new technologies. What were the things that you think were things you had to learn on the job that just you didn't even realize? Like I always usually assume workflows, best practices, communication, business things. You know, what were the things there, and how did that play into your experiences? Was that something that you were exposed to much?
Yeah, I think the working in a team, the communication, that kind of style of things was pretty familiar to me just from my background before. I think one thing that took a while to get used to, and I still don't know if I am used to it, is just the nature of programming and kind of refactoring and throwing out code. So, you know, you spend like a week on something, and then sort of 2 weeks later, you're like, that's not going to work. This needs to be like implemented a different way. I got to throw this out. Yeah. And that takes a while to kind of not feel like, because at the end of the day, like, unless, you know, there are times when that gets out of control, but usually it's like, well, no, this was a stepping stone to like a stronger feature, or something that's going to hold up more, like better and scale better. So looking at it as like a stepping stone and a learning opportunity, instead of I just lost a week of work, which can be hard to contend with.
Breaking that attachment to,
That's huge. I mean, that's such a big part of the later learning loops, I think, where I love this term that we just came up to. It's like normal, like the learning loops, the 4 learning loops of software development. Sadie, you're writing a blog post about this for us. Please.
Awesome.
Yeah, like in those later learning loops, I think what you're really figuring out, probably in the third learning loop, as I have that mental model now, you're probably learning a lot about how to incrementally be right. And I think one of the assumptions we have that causes a lot of imposter syndrome is we think they're like math. you know, like we learn in school, there's only one right answer. You got to do it in a certain amount of time and you're going to be graded on it. Whereas so much in software development is incremental, and you can make really good decisions to implement things incrementally and iteratively, and be doing so at the pace of, say, business interests or business requirements. And when you learn how to ebb and flow with that, you're actually never wrong, right? You can always be right. But one of the things I often see is this bias towards trying to be right means you overcommit on something too early, and you're not really aware, you know, not you, but like generally engineers may not be aware of the variables that are changing around them. And then it may not even be that you wrote it wrong. It's just some circumstance changed and that invalidated your last 2 weeks. So I always talk about it as being like really heads up and aware that you're doing more than programming. What you're trying to do is incorporate incremental learning and incremental implementation into what you think right is, and you're only going to unpack right over time as people give you more information about what your process is, right, or what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really nice way of looking at it too, because it does. The other thing is it kind of toys with this like perfectionist mindset as well. And I found that coming from, so like a very different role where I was doing a lot of like administration stuff and organizing workshops and running training sessions, where that was very much about like perfectionism and having to be, is like, if you do something, you do it complete and you do it right. Whereas development is so much about, if you go into it with the mindset of like, I'm gonna do this all perfectly, you're never even gonna get started.
Yeah.
Because there is no perfect. It's like, okay, what's the least I can do to make this thing work?
You nailed it. Minimalism.
And start from there.
Because you want to care about your craft, right? You want to take pride in it and you want to do it well. I try not to say do it right, because right is, you know, subjective in my opinion a lot of times with software development. But you want to do it well. You want to do it in a way you're proud of. You want to care. But if you do it so in such a way where it inflates or creates exposure for the time allocation that you've invested into it, then it's a diminishing return. So I always try to focus on this idea of how can I do it well, but taking a minimalist mindset to it, because I think minimalism is beautiful, it's elegant, and it's like, you know, it's a real craft. It's easy to do things the complicated ways. I always say it takes a lot of effort to do things the simple way.
Definitely, for sure.
So what happened after that? Dapper Labs came next?
Well, okay, so in the middle of that, so last year, so the company I was working for was a small startup, and anyone that's worked for a small startup knows sometimes things don't always go to plan. So about April last year, myself and a couple other team members got laid off just due to company funding stuff. But they were actually really great. I stayed on with them as like a contractor for a little bit, and they like were really great in terms of like career resource in finding a new job. And in that time, so I was applying for lots of stuff, applying for just kind of junior dev positions that I could find in Vancouver. A couple remote things, although things weren't as remote friendly as they are now. Yeah. And I saw an opportunity, it was a volunteer opportunity to teach web development in Ethiopia. So applied for that, and ended up talking to the wonderful Wangi, who has basically created this like incredible program. She's from Ethiopia, but was at UBC doing her computer science degree, and organized this 3-month-long program for women in Ethiopia to learn web development. Kind of very similar style to like what we've seen at Lighthouse. And her idea was to have different teachers come in at different parts of the course to teach different segments. So basically within a week of talking to her, I was on a plane. Whoa. And ended up
to Ethiopia.
Ethiopia.
Wow, that's a big jump.
Yeah. Well, I was like, I don't have a job right now. If I'm gonna get on a plane to Ethiopia, this is the best time to do it. And I had been teaching at Lighthouse before as well. So I was teaching the part-time intro to front end course and also doing some of the web development lectures. And just coming from kind of like a training background, kind of putting together training materials and and delivering them, it was all kind of like familiar for me. So I was like, I guess I may as well do it.
Nice.
And it was incredible. I was there for 2.5 weeks teaching mostly like their front end kind of segment. There's about 20 or so young women. Some of them had computer science degrees already. Actually, most of them did, but the kind of nature of the computer science program over there is that you don't actually write a ton of code like on a computer. So they would write their exams like pen on paper. So a lot of the stuff like getting familiar with the command line and GitHub, that kind of thing was new, but like they were like caught on super quick. And it was, just like awesome experience from the teaching. One of the, I think, most memorable thing for me was just being there on the first day, meeting all of the women, and one of them came up to me and she was like, "You're the first female software engineer I've ever met." I was like, "What?" Oh, wow.
That's awesome. Were you in, is it Addis Ababa?
Addis Ababa, yeah.
In
so
the
we
capital?
were,
Okay.
Yeah. So I was staying there. Wangi and I were sharing like a little condo there, and we were teaching at the University for Technology.
Okay.
So we would walk up, and best food I've ever eaten. Ethiopian food's amazing. Love it so much.
All right. You have that spongy bread that
injera.
you kind of eat injera that you use to eat everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. I love it. And I'm vegetarian, and it's all like really vegetarian friendly food, so it's perfect. So 8 tons of injera. And then about like a week and a half in, we were teaching, and we kind of there was definitely like obstacles there. The internet was kind of spotty, even in like the university. But for the most part, we got stuff up and running. And then one day, the government shut the internet down.
Completely, like across the board.
Across the whole country. So around whenever they have like national exams, they do it to prevent cheating, and they shut down the internet. So mobile signal, everything, or like mobile data. So the only way to contact someone is by calling them. But then the lines are like really crossed up anyway. So we were like, it was just really interesting. It was like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, I use the internet for a lot of stuff.
Yeah. You're just kind of completely shut down at that point. And how many days did it go on for?
So it was down for the first day, and then it came back on in the evening for like a couple hours. And at that point, we knew, because what had happened was I went in to teach in the morning. I was like, "Oh, do you know why the internet's down?" They're like, "Oh yeah, no, they shut it off." And I was like, "Okay, I guess we're gonna do like some HTML on the whiteboard." But then in the evening, because we knew, they're like, yeah, they do this every year for a couple days. So in the evening, we just like downloaded docs, and I got all of like my learning stuff, all of my teaching stuff on my desktop, got everything kind of set up so that I could at least do like kind of a lecture with some sort of pseudo live coding. And then mostly we were focusing on HTML and CSS, so that wasn't too bad. We just had to kind of, you never realize how much you rely on documentation until you physically can't access it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a somewhat similar experience, but maybe not. It's somewhat similar. I maybe 5 years ago, I think I had 3 weeks notice maybe, but it was a contract opportunity in China for this company. And so I flew to Shanghai, never been anywhere in Asia or anywhere really outside of North America at that point. Super, super hot. That's the one thing I remember about it. But what I remember is also just because of you can't get to a lot of the North American internet sites. I couldn't even, I think, get to AWS at that time or something. And it was crazy to just my whole experience of the internet, my whole foundational expectation of how things work suddenly just was like, and there's a whole other set of problem solving skills I had to come up with about, I remember setting up VPNs and all kinds of different things that I had to do to just get to the stuff that would be normal for me. And it's an interesting
did you have to rebuild your stack completely, or you found ways to get back to your old stack?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly the details. There was a lot, and it was a very short project, a lot of late hours and stuff. I remember the air conditioning would shut off at 6 PM. That was one of the things that was troubling. But aside from that, it was just like what you have access to on the internet there is different, right? Like there's just more of the Great Firewalls, I think what it's called in some circles. But you couldn't get to a lot of social media stuff. You couldn't get to YouTube. There was a lot of stuff that you could get to that would just be fine because it's, media or politically neutral, I guess, would be maybe the notion. But I remember that there were certain things that I just couldn't get to that I usually could, that I took for granted, and I had no idea how to work around it. It's not like I could hop on my LTE and just like tether it to my laptop or anything, and so you had a whole other set of problems. And then just generally like the learning, it was reflected in the learning styles of the other software engineers that I would actually meet, and I'd talk to them, and they'd be taking these steps, and I'd be like, why are you doing that? Why don't you just do this? And they'd be like, well, and then you'd have this thing that they have to work around. So I mean, it's I think it's a really humbling experience. It goes back to that learning loop stuff. It's like there's just so much in North America, especially here in Vancouver, Silicon Valley, anywhere in North America that's tech centric. We have such a rapid learning loop and a rapid access to tools, and it must have been a great experience to just be able to sort of be in that fourth learning loop, feeding it back down, but also they're teaching you because it's a totally different environment, right?
For sure, yeah. It's not, it's not like teaching at Lighthouse where you show up with your laptop and like borrow a plugin and get to work like showing it up on the TV. We're like, okay, we have a projector, we have to, like make sure we have all the stuff, like the wires and stuff, and then we were waiting on a little while. The laptops for the women hadn't arrived, so we were trying to use like different computer labs in different sections of the university, but some of them didn't, like the internet didn't work very well. So then we kind of like move. At one point, like we were sitting in the hallway getting semi-good internet, trying to kind of teach and do some stuff. But yeah, it was very humbling experience.
Here's the question I'm dying to know. Did you see the same kind of imposter syndrome in those students that you felt when you went through the experience here?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting. Definitely. I would talk to them afterwards, and a lot of them would be like, oh, like I'm not sure that like I'm cut out for this. Which is just such a classic thing that I think so many people feel when they're starting out in tech. But what I did really notice was on a similar end. Like I remember one of the days going into the classroom in the morning. So we would do the lecture in the morning. They would have projects to work on in the afternoon and evening, and then we would kind of let them work on that on their own in the evening. And we would come in the morning and see how everything went. And one of them had said, one of the girls had said, like, she was finding it really, really hard, and it was really frustrating. And she was just like so ready to quit. And then it worked. She got it to work, and she felt like the best developer in the world. And I was like, that is the feeling.
Yeah.
Like,
the magic moment.
That is the feeling right there.
Yeah, the reason I ask is I sometimes wonder if part of the imposter syndrome is just that, it's challenging. No doubt technology is challenging, but we don't have to bear the same level of resilience in the North American software industry that you might in some other environments that you're learning these things in. And I think like I completely understand that imposter syndrome would always be there, but I wonder sometimes if there's more of a resilience that we had in earlier days of the internet, or we had in different environments where you're learning from. I do know that the experience I had, and for most part, these were very senior people that I was interfacing with in Shanghai, but there was an air of confidence, a very strong air of confidence I felt, and maybe that was just culturally reinforced because of, reasons I don't particularly understand, but it definitely was something that was curious to me after that, is I thought, maybe there is just more imposter syndrome in our North American software development culture, because we're really trying to emphasize a lot of these complex ideas, and you have to know everything, and there's just so much choice. Whereas in some places it can be a little bit more simple. Like, I need internet, I need a terminal, and I need a language that can compile and do a thing, right? So there's not as many variables for you to be overwhelmed with, possibly. You have to simplify it. You have to take on that minimalist approach.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it like that.
I don't know. Maybe
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see some sort of, data on that, survey data, I guess, spread across different tech ecosystems, I guess you could do in different metros areas and see what that perspective is. Because it is a good thought, I think, what you're bringing up, Kyle, because this is like, you sometimes you're so ingrained in your own culture, which has a lot to do with your, geographic like proximity, that you may not realize what is part of that culture and what isn't.
A bit of the forest versus trees thing there, I think. Even like when I remember coming up and there'd be people who are like, oh man, that person's such a good developer. You know what I mean? Like that's what would sometimes create that imposter syndrome for me perpetually, because I'm like, oh, I'm not as good as that. And I think sometimes, like you start to see the forest through the trees, and like in North America, the access to internet, access to information, any of those things, there's just so much that you can look at and compare yourself to and go, whoa, like that's what I have to learn, I don't know what that means, but then here you are 6 months later and you've learned it better than the person that you were looking up to or something, because it's really hard. You got to get started, as you said earlier.
And I think once you get to a point too, where you know that level, that scale of how good someone can be at something. This comes up a lot with snowboarding for me. It's like, I know I'm a really bad snowboarder. I can go down the hill without falling, but I know I'm pretty bad. But then I ask other people who I know are pretty good snowboarders, and I'm like, how are you? How good are you or whatever? And like, oh, I'm pretty bad. And I'm like, okay, you're like 3 levels above me. So how are we both bad, But they just know that professional level because they've done it so much.
Yeah. But that's how you get better. You find people who think they're bad, and you're like, they're great. And then now there's this little bit of benchmark competitive thing. And I think my competitive nature was always one of the things that created more imposter syndrome for me. But I would always rule that with like, well, time to get better. Like if they can do it, I'm gonna have to figure out how to do it. I mean, not in snowboarding. I can't do that anymore, but maybe sometimes imperfectly.
Yeah, definitely. I think a little bit of competitive nature can help for sure.
Have you seen that in any of your mentorship? Just like a little bit of challenging as an element that is factored in. We talked a little bit about the supportive nature of the mentor that you had. Now, as you have gone into different environments, how do you think about more of that challenging aspect of it? I mean, I wouldn't use the word competitive because everybody's on the same team, but even sports team are a little bit competitive together, right?
Yeah, I think, I don't know that I would say like competitive either, but I think, so where I'm at now, working at Dapper, it's a much larger team, just like engineer wise. I went from the sort of team of 2 now to a much bigger team, and an incredibly supportive team. Like I feel very, very lucky. And I think the nature of it is that we are all very supportive of each other and very supportive in pushing each other to kind of reach our best potential without sounding super cheesy. Like, everyone is very much eager to, so I guess the way that they have it structured is obviously there are levels. We have senior developers and we have senior engineers, but on kind of the face of it, everyone is just kind of grouped together. And when we have meetings around decisions to be made, that involves all of us. Like it's very much, they're very good about making everyone's voice heard and getting lots of different opinions. So I've never felt that I am, like a super junior developer where I'm just getting like these little tasks to go and finish off. Like we're all involved in the implementation meetings and even the feature planning meetings. And I think just by kind of involving everyone, you're empowering people to not feel like they're just kind of a cog in the wheel, but actually like a really kind of integral part of this whole system and team. And I think that is not necessarily like directly challenging, but it's kind of this way of going like, like you are directly involved in the success of this product. And that is super empowering and I think really motivational.
Yeah, and it drives you to want to bring your best work, your best voice to the conversation too. And that's, I think, part of it where nobody's challenging you necessarily directly in that situation, but the group dynamic creates this inclusive for the purpose of having the best ideas rise to the top, and then everybody sort of brings their best foot forward when they're contributing to those conversations because they want the whole team to rise above the individual capability, right?
Yeah, 100%.
It's awesome. Dapper's amazing. I mean, we've been following along for a while. I know so many great engineers over there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but came out of Axiom as well, right? At one point, yeah. So know Rogam really well, and been just so many good things that group of people have built here in Vancouver. You're on an amazing team.
I definitely am. I love working there. It's great, and we kind of still sit under like the Axiom Zen umbrella a little bit, but Dapper's really kind of making a lot of steps in independence in the gaming blockchain sector.
Tell us a little bit about it for anyone who doesn't know about Dapper Labs and what Dapper
Sure.
Yeah.
So I guess what Dapper is really famous for is CryptoKitties, which is online, basically like blockchain gaming where you can buy, sell, and breed collectible cats. Which had 100%. It's like Neopets on the blockchain.
That's right. Comes full circle. It comes full circle.
Yeah. And I guess Dapper's kind of mission is that like bringing fun and games to the blockchain. So it's looking at this newer technology and how can we apply things like gaming to it. So the project that I'm working on right now is a game partnered with the NBA called NBA Top Shot. And it's kind of similar sort of style, collectible, but basketball moments in basketball history. So you can own on the blockchain moments in basketball history. So that's.
And how does that look like? If I want to go back and take Michael Jordan's famous last minute shot, game winning shot, can I actually own that shot?
An expensive one.
Maybe. Yeah, that's going to be a pricey one.
How many crypto kitties is it going to take? That's what I want to know.
Might be a couple. Well, you can find that out pretty soon because we're in our beta stage right now. So we've got some users playing around with it. And that's, I think we're going to have probably public launch coming up fairly soon. And then you'll get to see, but you can get on the wait list if you want. If you go to NBA Top Shot. NBATopShot.com. You can get on the wait list for that and get invited to own some basketball moments.
Nice. It's great to see your work go into the real world and have people use it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's super exciting. Yeah. It's really neat seeing, especially being on a bigger team where working very much on like certain things, and then when it all comes together and we have like our show and tells where we see the product all finished together, you're like, oh man, there's so much going on that like I'm not aware of too, and it's all come together to create this really neat product.
There it is, right there
on the wait list.
Dapper. Well, there we go. I put in my 2 cents there. I'm going to be looking to see what sort of opportunities I can, probably some KG ones since I grew up in Minnesota. So just to be honest, sorry, Michael Jordan. Well, Sadie, I mean, we're almost to the end of the hour. Thanks so much for coming on. Is there anything that anything else, shout outs, anything else you wanted to bring up?
I think. Oh man, I didn't prepare my shout outs.
Shout outs to mom. I'll do it for you, mom.
Mom and dad. I think probably just shout outs to all my mentors too, in the whole progress of becoming a developer. I think that your kind of leadership and senior devs and mentors and peers as well are so important in helping you overcome imposter syndrome and level up and get better at what you're doing.
That's amazing. Yeah, totally agree. Mentorship is so valuable, and it's really great that people, you know, put that effort and time into others. Yeah. Sadie, where can we find you online?
I'm on Twitter. My Twitter name is SadeF, SADEF, I believe. I'm not super active on Twitter.
I've heard of that site, I think.
And yeah.
We'll throw it into the description so people can find you and say hello. And
awesome. Yeah, tweet me anytime. My personal website is sadie.codes.
Nice.
Oh, right.
That's
yeah.
a good one.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah. That's high praise coming from.
I love
the
good domain name. I love a good domain name. Yeah, that one will go. You watch out. You're gonna start getting emails of like, can we buy this off you, please? Like, yeah, that will go. Yeah.
I know. It's gonna get more expensive.
Yeah, hold on to it.
Just keep the crypto kitty tracker of, you know. Know the value in crypto kitties, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Right, yeah. Well, thank you.
Hoard my basketball moment.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's to pay
for my domain.
That's interesting. I'm very curious to see where that goes, and what I can get. What sort of, probably food items can I get for certain basketball moments at really key times. So, Sadie, thanks for coming on. It was a pleasure. It's so great to hear about your developer journey, and it seems like you're in a really great place now. So, appreciate it. And that's it for the Op Show.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah.